Welcome to the Right to Reason podcast. I'm your host, Robert Stanley. Donald Trump is finally gone, and Joe Biden was elected the president of the United States of America. We should probably do an episode on that, but honestly, I just don't give a damn. I didn't vote for either men, and I am not going to allow the media, the oligarchy, and the remaining powers that be dictate what raises or lowers my blood pressure. I did that 4 years ago, and I won't do it again. I probably, like you, am tired of the bullshit. And we choose to focus on our families, friends, personal goals, overcoming our challenges. And there's one more thing I care about, and that's philosophy. Trying to answer life's most elusive questions of our existence. Today, we discuss something that many Trump supporters are likely feeling right now, nihilism. I believe it's stopping short of the logical and inevitable conclusion of absurdism. To quickly explain these topics, we first talk to Emerson Green shortly, and then we engage in a debate on absurdism with Javier Javier, and we see how absurd we have to get to maintain a nihilistic worldview.
It's the Right to Reason podcast.
Emerson Green, good to talk to you, brother.
Hey, man, good to talk to you, too.
Yeah, it's been, how long has it been? A couple months? To maybe 6 months or so?
A few months. Last time we talked, I think, was about the pandemic, or I think there might have been something in between there. But we were on with Javier and a bunch of other people talking about the pandemic, and I was right about everything I said. So
yeah, you called it. This year's been so crazy. I can't keep up with all the crazy stuff. Alex Trebek just died. I saw that.
Like just now. Yeah.
Insane. Speaking of Javier, I was thinking after you and I talk about Camus, I then would release a debate with Javier about his stance on nihilism. And my take is, tell me if you agree, nihilism is a natural progression from atheism and methodological materialism, but that's not where we stop. And that's my point that I intend to make to Javier shortly, is that we need to continue on to absurdism. And I think that's the logical progression thereafter. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would say nihilism is our starting point, and that was Nietzsche's whole thing. And, we're talking about Camus, and he was a big fan of Nietzsche. Nietzsche's whole, body of work is trying to overcome nihilism.
Can you expound on that and maybe tell us a little bit about Camus as well?
Yeah, so Camus wasn't an existentialist. He's often mistaken for one. He denied that he was an existentialist, but you can see why he's mistaken for an existentialist. Mm-hmm. And, not just because he hung out with Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, but he denied being a philosopher at all. It's not totally disingenuous if you read his journals or read his speeches, because as far as I'm concerned, he's clearly a philosopher and maybe even an existentialist, but he said he didn't believe in reason enough to be a philosopher, but he just considered himself an artist, which Nietzsche would agree that art is really important in this struggle to find meaning. But yeah, he was first and foremost an artist and a literary genius.
Was he like a lot of the other philosophers, but if we're even going to be able to label him that way, but where he was kind of like a drunk and depressed all the time? A lot of people think he was depressed just because he talked about suicide a lot.
Yeah, he has these quotes that kind of give people the impression that he was this misanthrope. He said there's only one really serious philosophical question, and that is suicide. And he opens one of his novels with Maman died today, or yesterday maybe, I don't know. Mm-hmm. So people get the impression that he's dark and morose. But his philosophy was profoundly life-affirming and inspiring. I don't know if he was a drunk. I know his friend was Sartre. I feel like he probably was. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say he was.
I wonder if that goes together, if being completely skeptical of all the BS in the world and being intellectually honest enough to just take whatever reality tells you and just accept it as it is, that's got to lead to some level of depression. I mean, I've heard, I don't know if it's true, it's like any of those old things, don't go swimming after you eat or something. I don't know the validity of it, but I've heard that depression is actually a result of just extreme rationalism.
I don't know if I would buy into that. I think that some people fancy themselves to be highly intelligent, and then when they're depressed, they're yeah, it's just because I'm so smart. And I think you can be both smart and not depressed.
More about chemicals in the brain than anything else, I'd assume. But it definitely, I don't know. when I
Yeah, the
think,
tortured genius stereotype.
yeah, and I'll be
Yeah.
honest, like I'm not super smart or anything, but like whenever I start thinking about these things and go down that rabbit trail, I feel at a minimum some kind of existential angst would probably be the best way to describe it.
Yeah. Oh, I should bring up Rick and Morty at this point, probably, because
Okay.
I couldn't remember as I was saying that, or as you were saying, like the correlation between being smart and being depressed. Yeah, I think a lot of people think that they're like Rick from Rick and Morty, which, by the way, I'm so glad I can finally admit to liking that show without being lumped into all the psychos who were, associated with it for so long. But
Yeah,
that show rocks, and it's always been good.
I love
And
it.
just Rick and Morty is
What was the
actually like a
psycho
great
thing?
example of like existentialist philosophy and like the absurd and all that. It's actually a really great show.
What just for any listeners that might not be familiar, what is absurdism exactly?
The absurd is the clash between our pretensions and what reality is actually offering us. Like we have this overriding desire to ask ultimate questions and find meaning, and we're stuck with, the impossibility of achieving any adequate answer. And, I haven't really had an experience of the absurd in a while. I used to have it all the time. Lately, I'm just kind of content. I guess I haven't really, had that feeling of absurdity where you just kind of recognize that what you're doing is just completely pointless.
Hmm.
And you think it's important, but then you have the ability to reflect and kind of zoom out and, realize that your entire life is absurd. Everything you're doing is absurd. But I'm curious though, do you have this feeling like
Yes.
currently, or is it just a memory right now?
It comes and goes. It mostly occurs for me when I look at my hands on a beautiful day. Like not trying to wax poetic, but just being honest. They're so important to me is how I identify. I don't know, just hands. Like I remember looking at my grandfather's hands when after he had passed, he was laying in the coffin, and just seeing them lifeless, and seeing mine full of life, and they look strong. You know what I mean? Like not like I'm some muscle dude or something, but just everybody's hands likely look strong to them. I would assume maybe that says more about how I see myself than anything. But it's just I see life in them, and on like a beautiful day, like your brain's thinking about life. There's breeze blowing, sunlight, animals frolicking, what have you. But just in those moments, it just becomes overwhelming to me that I have no idea what's going on, what any of this is. It's creepy. Just doesn't justify it, but it's definitely a creepy feeling.
Yeah, yeah, man. I'm kind of envious because I haven't had that feeling in a while. Maybe I need to watch some Rick and Morty or something, or read Ecclesiastes to get the feeling back.
Yes, you refer to the absurd as a feeling, and I can follow you there. But I was hoping you could kind of explain to us what it is as a philosophy.
So Camus' absurdism. Well, everyone's heard about the myth of Sisyphus, and that's sort of the metaphor that is ideal for explaining absurdism, where you have this guy who's straining to push a rock up a mountain, it rolls back down, and then he just has to push it up, and he's been condemned by the gods to just roll this rock up a hill for eternity. And human beings are like seeking meaning. We can't help but try to seek meaning, and then just our answers tumble back down because the universe is just not offering us the kinds of meanings and matterings that we're looking for. And this is one kind of reason I don't accept some of the even I'm definitely not a nihilist, even though I agree it is sort of our starting point. But one bone to pick that I have with a lot of people who talk about nihilism or existentialism is they often forget their own minds in these statements about how the universe is cold and indifferent, and it's so big and we're so small, and our lives are so short, and so on and so forth. The thing that they forget, they'll say the universe is purposeless, and it's like, well, we clearly do create purpose, like, and that's sort of Camus' solution as well. Like, yes, it's true that everything is absurd, and the absurd hero knows this and cares about those things anyway. And for Camus, it's sort of like an act of defiance. There can be meaning, but it's not coming from the universe. And like I said, my kind of issue with how some people phrase this is that your mind is a part of the universe, and meaning does come from your own mind. Like, it's true that, yes, like God is dead, the universe is not granting you meaning like it used to, but there is still purpose. The universe is definitely not purposeless. Like, there is meaning in the universe. And I think that when people say that the universe is purposeless, they're kind of forgetting that they are a part of the universe and that you're not sort of standing outside the universe looking in.
Would that be just your subjective opinion, to play devil's advocate here, that there is purpose, but ultimately in a deterministic world, you're just supposed to think that. You have no choice but to think it, but it's not in fact true.
Yeah, but that's all part of the universe as well. Everything about your mind is a part of the natural world. And, so let's say that, because let's just say God exists and he's commanding you to do something. Like God is giving you purpose by telling you to roll a rock up a hill. And it's like, okay, maybe there is some meaning granted by dint of the fact that God is the one telling you to do it. But really, like, if the task is that arbitrary, are you really going to find it meaningful? Like, even if God told you to do it, versus something like, raising your kids or having friends that you care about, or family, or some project that you're invested in. Like, those things sort of come from within. Like, you care about those things. It's springing from your own mind and your own consciousness. And even if God told you to do that, it's just sort of like another reason why it might be meaningful. I don't really see how adding God to the picture sort of can turn meaningless things into meaningful things. And if you already find something, like, because when I've raised this to believers, they will say, like, well, God will direct you towards things that you'll find meaningful. But, they're kind of conceding my point there, that you find things meaningful, is coming from you. And then God kind of helps you, he directs you towards those things.
Even finding God meaningful, he didn't give you that. Their whole putting value in something that comes from God. Well, the only reason that you value hierarchies or might makes right or power or omniscience, whatever it is that omnibenevolence, this thing that you hold God in such high regard because of, you have put value in that.
Yeah, and it's people find these sorts of conversations like so depressing and dark, and I personally don't get that, but I can see why someone might feel like that's the case. Like, Camus opens the book, like we mentioned, with there's only one really serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Deciding whether or not life is worth living is to answer the fundamental question in philosophy. All other questions follow from that. But the thing is, he goes on to, answer his challenge. Like, he doesn't think suicide is the way to escape the absurdity of life. Yeah, obviously, I agree with that because I haven't killed myself. But there is this kind of absurdity where, just to answer your original question, there's this juxtaposition between the human need to find meaning and the unreasonable silence of the universe in response, which is how he puts it. But the rest of that book that we referenced, the myth of Sisyphus, is his response to what he sees as the obvious, first question of suicide and how to find meaning in our lives, which seem meaningless and, seem totally absurd. And like I said, his answer is sort of, yeah, it is absurd, but you embrace that anyway. And for him, it's sort of, like I said, like a fist shaking act of defiance, which, I guess, well, let me just ask you, is that kind of how you feel about the absurd? Do you feel like it's sort of an act of rebellion against the universe?
I feel in tune with everything that you said up to that point, and I agree with you that that's kind of how he presents it. But I also got from Myth of Sisyphus that it was beautiful pushing the rock, that it has value in itself, not as a defiance to the gods, as much as having meaning, even if it's arbitrary, still is satisfying in its own value. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I think he'd agree with you. He just, because he's French and rebellious and whatnot, he has to add that,
which
defiance.
I like it. It's badass. It's rock and roll. I dig his whole personality, the whole way that he explained it. I don't know that I necessarily look at finding happiness and value and meaning in life in a resistance way. It's more of an acceptance way, like enjoying the day by just laying back on the ground and just watching clouds move. Like I'm not enjoying it going, fuck you clouds. I'm enjoying it, just recognizing I have no control over this, and I'm just grateful to be here.
Yeah. No, that's maybe all that absurdism itself is just too dramatic for some of the people listening, or at least Camus' response, which is sort of like a rebellious sort of like libertarianism, which, by the way, he wasn't like, we didn't really get into biographical details, but there's a lot of interesting stuff there. He's mistakenly taken as an anti-communist quite a lot. Just, I wanted to mention, if all this shaking your fist Frenchly at the universe is too dramatic for you and you're just rolling your eyes. For those people, I have the closing paragraph from Thomas Nagel's essay, The Absurd. If a sense of the absurd is a way of perceiving our true situation, then what reason can we have to resent or escape it? Like the capacity for epistemological skepticism, it results from the ability to understand our human limitations. It need not be a matter for agony unless we make it so, nor need it evoke a defiant contempt of fate that allows us to feel brave or proud. Such dramatics, even if carried on in private, betray a failure to appreciate the cosmic unimportance of the situation. And then he just goes on to say that, if nothing matters, then our feeling that nothing matters doesn't matter either, and we can approach our absurd lives with irony instead of heroism or despair.
So the conversation that follows is with myself and Javier Javier. Neither of us philosophers, but both of us do enjoy talking about it. So I'm glad that you were able to kind of set the groundwork, kind of explain things. I would recommend anybody listening to check out Counter-Apologetics. Emerson also has something that he posts, maybe every 3 or 4 episodes as a Walden Pod. Would that be fair?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, about that.
I love that. It's like podcast, but Walden Pond. Like I love the name. Anyway, anybody listening, if you want to hear a real philosopher, and nothing against Javier, but not two guys trying to do philosophy and arguing over it, but you want to hear a real philosopher, check out Counter-Apologetics. Emerson, thanks so much for breaking this down for us, brother.
Thank you for having me.
Waves were high upon the sea, the winds approaching gales, drowned in misery, then gone to New South Wales.
This episode of the Right to Reason podcast is brought to you by our patrons and contributors like me. We have all recognized the value of the unrestrained marketplace of ideas and have decided to make a difference. You can make a difference too. Contribute at patreon.com/right and learn more about your right to reason at therighttoreason.com. Your activism is appreciated.
What's going on, Javier Lobby? It's your boy Javier with the Javier Show. Make sure you say it twice. I'm back with Robert Stanley from the Right to Reason podcast. What's up?
Hey, buddy.
All good?
Yeah, doing really well. I taught my son how to chop wood this morning, and I ended up chopping a bunch of wood while he watched instead of what was supposed to happen. He'd been messing up in school, so his punishment was to chop wood. So I had to show him how, but then I ended up doing all the work, so now I'm sore.
Well, I see who's raising who.
Yeah, parenting method did not work.
So we got in a conversation about being a nihilist, and you kind of had some questions about nihilism when it came to my nihilism. So I thought it'd be great for us to have a conversation and sit down and kind of go through it a little bit. It'd be something that the listeners might be interested in hearing about.
Yeah, I would think we probably both agree. I think there's one more step after nihilism. If we mean it the same way, do you mind just saying what you mean by that? Because I'm guessing it's more than just the Jordan Peterson version of you're clearly not lazy. You are always busy posting stuff. You post like 3 times as much as I do.
I know, man. But you too busy chopping wood over there.
Yeah, I'm chopping wood instead of working on the podcast.
Yeah. So what I mean when I say I'm a nihilist, my definition would be simply is I don't believe the universe has any purpose or meaning behind it. There, in the overarching theme of it all, there is no purpose, to the universe or existence in its entirety.
I think that's true. I would agree. I think Camus came along. Well, Kierkegaard comes along with absurdism initially, but his whole thing was something that we would both agree as atheists. It's just absurd to believe in a God. And then Albert Camus comes along and says, well, let's take this absurdism a step further. Of course, there's no God. There's no nothing. Kind of the point that you were making. And while addressing nihilism, his whole argument was that that's what's beautiful about life. You just need to take it a step further and accept that everything is a bit absurd. It's not that reality is absurd. Reality is just reality, right? And it's not that we're absurd for trying to live it with meaning and purpose, because that's just how we are. But he said the absurdity is these two things coming together, and that's kind of like the story of Sisyphus. where he had angered the gods. What did he do? Do you remember? I think it's always somebody
It's
fucked
always
somebody.
something.
It's always somebody having sex. But I think he was a king and he wasn't supposed to. Yeah. They killed him, and then he figured out a way to escape Hades, I think, and he came back to life basically. And they were really mad about that. So they condemned him to pushing a rock up a hill for eternity. And once he would get it to the top of the mountain, probably better to say mountain than hill, it would just roll back down to the bottom, and his life was completely absurd. It was completely worthless. And that's kind of what Camus uses as a reference to argue that the real happy moments of Sisyphus's life are those moments that he is pushing the rock up the hill. It sucks when he gets to the top and it rolls back down, and it sucks walking all the way back down. But he argues that those times that we're pushing our rock, we just have a purpose. We have meaning even to ourselves, and that's kind of beautiful in itself and a bit absurd.
Yeah, I would even take it a step further. I would take it to the extreme as to say, if there is a God, let's say there is a God, I would still believe that nihilism is the proper way to frame reality. Adding a God or taking away a God doesn't change the fact that everything is purposeless in the end. Because if you exist to just serve that God would need a God to give him purpose. And even if you died and went to heaven and lived in eternity forever, what's the purpose of that? You say to serve God, and then I'll ask you, well, what's the purpose of that? You end up in an infinite regression of what's the purpose of what, And eventually you're going to get to the point where there is no purpose. This dude just exists and this is what he wanted, but there's no real purpose. It so happened that he wants it this way.
Yeah, I feel like the Bible addressed that immediately in Psalms, because that's what David said when he said, why is it that the unjust can be so successful? That things can go so well for bad people if you're here, talking to God. God didn't really have a response for him. And when Job asked God the same thing, why do I suffer? Why is there suffering? Why is everything... It really seems like nobody's piloting the ship here, God. And God just says, becomes a tornado and says, F you, Job. I'm God, So I think that the Old Testament was aware of the conflict that you're presenting right away. And the way that they solved it was, the Jewish people just blamed themselves, which isn't necessarily a bad way to go. I think Albert would agree with that concept, at least as a lifestyle, where if you are constantly taking responsibility for things that go wrong in your life, you're more likely to be successful. You're more likely to be happy because of the result of having that attitude. We would all say that's, generally speaking, a good character trait to have. But with the concept of a deity, it's ridiculous because he would be ultimately responsible.
Do you think that the logical conclusion for anybody, especially an atheist, how is it possible for an atheist to not be a nihilist?
I think they misunderstand what you mean whenever you say it, because I think what they think you mean by nihilism is nothing matters even at level 1, where you're not saying that. You're saying nothing matters at level 30. And the big full scheme of things, it really doesn't matter. And it's just a failure to put these concepts at levels where, the analogy of, I tell you, while I was out chopping wood, I say, I hurt my son intentionally while we were chopping wood. I would immediately face some kind of social cost in our friendship, right? Because you would immediately think of me as a bad person, as you should. But then that's one level, and then we take it to a higher level and say, I intentionally hurt my son today. And you say, why? I said, well, he had a rotting tooth. I had to have it pulled when we went to the dentist. Okay, well, that's in some kind of utilitarian ethics system, makes perfect sense, but that's on a different level. Or I say, my son died in war. And you say, how did that happen? Well, I always encouraged him to go into the military. I thought it was a good career and a good way to serve your country. And you say, well, on that level, whether you agree with that or not, you can at least understand that that's on a totally different thing, where maybe he went and, the lies about WMDs, and then he was one of the people that was just shooting brown people left and right, or you know what I mean? And Chelsea Manning caught him on tape. But either way, ultimately, it seems for a greater purpose. And we just keep taking this analogy into infinity. And at some point, we know nothing really matters. It wouldn't matter if I hurt my son or not. Like it really
I
it doesn't matter if you're a serial killer or not in the big picture. But I think that's
see that me and you've been listening to some of the same people.
sure. I would think so.
I would say that I really personally, I consider myself to be a nihilist through and through. I really don't think everything on a local level matters either. I don't think whether me and my wife love each other, I don't think that has a purpose. I don't think there's a purpose to that either. I don't think
Even on
there's a
level
purpose. Even on level one, I don't think there's a purpose. I mean, if the universe is purposeless, then it follows. It follows all the way down the whole rabbit hole,
I don't believe you.
all the way down the ladder. I really do.
Not
think
saying you're a
we
liar.
have-
I don't believe the words that are coming out of your mouth right now. Of course you think there's value in whether you give somebody a sandwich or not.
Let's make sure we get our terms right. Is there value? Do I value something? That's different than whether I believe it has purpose. For example, I could prefer that me and my wife love each other. I could value the love that my wife gives me. But is there a purpose to her loving me? Of course not. Is there a purpose to me loving her back? Of course not. Then you would have to give me what is the purpose. You could say, well, nature wants you and a woman to get together and make a baby. But whether or not we make a baby, it still doesn't matter, because one day we're all going to die. What you did and what you didn't do is not going to matter. And I see it like this. I'm here. I might as well enjoy myself. I might as well push for the things I care about right now. But I don't think it's purposeful. I just think I have values, things that I value, and those are the things that I prefer. And that's the way for all of us. Some people just don't like to admit it.
I feel like it's a semantic disagreement that we're having with the word purpose, where obviously we would agree things happen for a reason, but not necessarily for a purpose in the same way like a religious person might. There's no purpose to life kind of thing, but we want to live life with a purpose, right? But it's just using the word in two different ways. So yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, in that sense, I would agree, but that's not what I meant by the reason people misunderstand your nihilism is because they're failing to understand levels. I wasn't saying that level one implies purpose in the way you mean purpose. I was saying level one is things that you care about and you put meaning in them. And like I said, value. Obviously, as you continue on the going higher up in this number, those values start going away.
Yeah. For example, if somebody asks me, hey man, what are you doing for when the universe ends? Why would I care? You know what I'm saying? Because now you're so far out on that level. It's yeah. So on local level, when you get down to the nitty gritty on the local level, then you start to realize, okay, well, I care what happens now. I care about me and my wife's relationship. I care about these things. I find value, and some would say purpose in what I'm doing. You can apply purposes to certain things. For example, if I decide that I'm going to vote one way or the other, I may have a purpose on which way that I'm voting. My purpose to vote for this person is because I want them to do X, Y, and Z. You know what I mean? Right. On a philosophical level, I can't get my purpose at all on any level. You know?
I think Camus would push back on you and say, since you're staying at this level of nihilism, what is your goal? What are you doing it for? I would think the natural step forward is absurdism at that point. Once you accept that there is no meaning to life and that suicide is probably the most rational conclusion.
Not exactly. Because if there is no purpose, there is no any of that, then you would only assume that this is your only opportunity to experience anything. Why would you blow that?
Because the existential angst, by recognizing that there is no ultimate meaning and also recognizing that you have a need to find it, leads us to what Camus argued, one of two forms of suicide. Most everybody takes the first one, and that's some kind of religious thing, that you say your purpose or your hope or your love and your faith and all that comes from without rather than from within. That my culture means a lot to me. God bless America. I love Jesus and all that kind of thing. That's what he would call philosophical suicide. You're finding a way to deal with the absurd nature of reality and this existential angst by filling that gap with something else. And he said that that's totally rational because you have to deal with that problem. It's not a happy feeling. I mean, you have to admit, it's not necessarily like nihilism is a little depressing, isn't it?
No,
Not at all?
I find it freeing. For one, I wouldn't want to be stuck in an endless loop of purpose. I wouldn't want to be always existing for the sake of some purpose, especially if it's out of my control. So to me, that would be depressing. That just imagine being creative for somebody else's purpose, and no matter what you do, that person's purpose will always trump what you want. That to me is depressing. The second thing I would say is once you realize that, hey, I have a rare opportunity here, why wouldn't I, taste things? Why wouldn't I, experience certain things? Why not? I mean, why not? Whether you die today or you die when you're 110, you're still going to die. But in between that time, why not, enjoy yourself? Why not, experience what it's like to exist?
I can see that as rhetoric, but I see more in you than that. You actually care about things that aren't just hedonistic in nature, things that don't necessarily make you happier or sadder. You have moral obligation, you have ethical contingencies, you have political opinions. You okay, as a libertarian, you care if someone else's nap is violated, even if they have nothing to do with you, I would assume, right?
Yes.
That doesn't fit into your hedonistic worldview.
It does, because I'm very good at being a human, for one. Mm-hmm. We're just humans. And humans, by nature, they value things, they care about things, even irrational things. That's just what humans do. For example, I see humans as ants. Ants work in a colony, right? And their whole situation is set up to where they serve the queen because they want to keep the reproduction going, and they have a whole order to things, right? Humans think they're more important than ants. Humans think that they are special. What? We can read, we can write, we can speak languages, we can build skyscrapers, we can go to the moon. How do we know that that's just not what humans do? What if it's just built into human nature just as much as ants serving the queen? It's just different, so we somehow think it's special. So like an alien force could be hovering over the planet Earth right now, looking at us and like, look at humans. They just doing what humans do. Just like we would look at ants saying, ants just do what ants do. We're not special, but I'm very good at being a human because I'm doing human things. Humans care about politics. Humans argue and debate. Humans value things. That just comes with the territory. It's as natural to me as it is to ants when they serve the queen.
But you apply a moral significance to these concepts. You describe it in the way that you say, I either like vanilla or chocolate ice cream.
It's that way.
I don't think it is. You're applying some kind of moral value to this, which means you care about it, which means it's not just all for your pleasure. You're doing some things against your own pleasure. It's not fun for you all the time to do a podcast that's about reason and thought and free speech, but you choose to do that where you could probably have fun doing a podcast on, whatever, something else that's not as frustrating, perhaps.
But I'm doing what I'm doing, and I'm doing what you're doing at the same time. I'm you and you're me. We just so happen to have different experiences and different families. But if you were me, you wouldn't know it because you're so busy being me. Does it make sense? I see humans.
Explain that.
So, for example, if you were born me and I was born you, how would you know it? How would you know the difference? You wouldn't know.
There wouldn't be a difference.
Exactly. You would just think, you've always been me, and that's just the way, that's just who you are. And all humans are that way. We're all just circumstantial beings who have certain DNA, certain experiences that groomed us to be what we consider to be me or you. And the way I see it is, it comes with the territory. I don't see it as, you say that I care or I have morals. I don't have morals. I have preferences. A preference. My preferences are based on my DNA, my experiences, and everything that has happened up to this point to shape me to who I am. So if anything, is all out of my control. So it's not necessarily morals. It's just I've become the type of person who would prefer these things over those things. Because if that was the case, if rationality ruled everything, we would all come to the same conclusions on every single subject, but we don't. So morals are subjective. They're all based on preference. Even the things that we objectively know or claim to know, we can't even really prove. For example, we could be in a simulation. The laws of nature could be built within the simulation for us to believe it's objective. We don't know that. So could you ever be 100% certain about anything?
I agree that our morals are subjective, but I think there was an implication there that objective morality doesn't exist. And I think it can still exist even in an atheist nihilistic sense.
Not at all.
Perhaps not at, once again, referencing levels, not at level 30, right? At level 30, none of this shit matters. And not really at level 1 either. But somewhere in between, I think it certainly exists. And I would say it does in the sense of before we knew slavery was wrong, it was still wrong to enslave someone. Now, you could say, well, that's just your subjective opinion about that concept, Robert. But I would come back and say, whether I believe it or not, we know it would still be wrong. Because
how do you
what's
know?
best for human flourishing is still the same, whether there's humans or not.
Why is human flourishing your standard?
Because that's what we're talking about when we're talking about morality. If not,
No.
I don't know what morality is.
Morality is created. It's made up. It's subjective. For example, there are plenty of religions, for the Mayans or the Aztecs, for example, who did child sacrifices or whatever. To them, that wasn't in human flourishing sake, but to them, it was about morals. To them, they had a moral duty to the gods to perform it. You wouldn't say that was moral,
Wait,
but they would.
are you going to make the claim that human sacrifice is wrong for me, but not for a Mayan 2,000 years ago?
No, what I'm saying is your morals are based on your preference, and the Mayans' preference was totally different than yours. So in their eyes, their morals are totally different than yours. And if you got thrown back in that time, I guarantee you real quick, you will find out that most people think you're immoral.
Sure, but they'd be wrong.
You couldn't prove it.
No.
Why can't you prove it? If it's true for all time, at all moments in life and existence, you should be able to use your logic to prove it to be wrong in any circumstance at any given time throughout history. But you can't, because it's subjective. It's purely subjective.
No, there's things that you can know that you can't prove.
For example,
let's say you don't speak English, and I told you that I have a priori knowledge that a bachelor is unmarried. I can't prove it to you, but I know that to be true.
All you have to do is change the definition, that you can make a married man a bachelor.
Right, but then that wouldn't be my statement. My statement would still be true. And it's something that I know.
Based on your subjective understanding of the definition. If I change the definition and we all agree on a different definition, you can make a married man a bachelor.
Well, then those words would have zero value at the moment that there is no objective definition, or at least a mutual agreed definition of the word. At that point, language wouldn't exist. So you have to, not to berate this word, but you have to push this analogy to the point of absurdity for it to make your argument. Actually, if possible, to pull back, because we're off on epistemology at this point, right? But where we were originally, you were saying you are a nihilist because nothing has any value to you. Or nothing has any purpose. And I agree with that. And then I said, because at level 30, there is no value, but at level 30, nothing really matters. But at level 1, some things do matter. And you said, no, at level 1, it doesn't even matter. And then I disagreed with you. That led us to objective morality, and we can continue there if you want. But I'm still stuck at, even at level 1, I don't understand how you would say things don't matter.
Things don't matter objectively. They matter subjectively. They never matter objectively. It's just an opinion. It's just a preference. We care because we're subjective beings who care about things, and we don't even get to choose what we care about because, you know, the whole domino effect. But we subjectively care, but we don't objectively care. There is no objective purpose to anything, to any one of us.
At level 30.
At 1. For example, let me ask you this. Is it wrong for you to stop at a green light in the middle of traffic? Is it wrong? Is it morally wrong, objectively?
That you're presenting such a insignificant example, so it makes
Why-
me want
why-
to say no. But
Why
I would
is
say
it
at a
insignificant?
it's wrong objectively based on ethics, not on morals. And just to be clear, so that you don't think I'm just playing games with wording. Ethics are a subset of morality. The laws that we think would best apply to having a moral code. So ethically, yeah, I think that is at least rude. It inconveniences others. Is there any moral problem with that? Probably not. Not unless I saw an ambulance light in my rearview mirror. At that point, I could say that there's some moral implication there. And we could make hypotheticals all day of to what extent. Well, maybe there is an ambulance and you didn't hear it, or maybe the person behind you is pregnant and they were driving, or whatever. On their way to the hospital, or but just keeping the analogy as simple as you left it. Yeah, I would think objectively it would be unethical. I don't know that I could make a moral claim.
Okay. So let's try to go with something a little more concrete then, so we can actually focus on morals.
Like having sex with a corpse. That's a good one.
Okay.
We've all been there. Sure.
All right. So
you have sex with one dead body and you get labeled that way the rest of your life, It's called experimentation. But anyway, but that's a good one. You're not violating, and I'm sure you're already ahead of me. That's why I would choose that analogy, but you're not violating that person's freedom in any way. You're not taking away their liberty. You're not raping them. You're not doing anything. I mean, I guess technically in a legal sense, you could call it rape because it involves inserting yourself into them slowly.
So would you consider would you consider it to be objectively morally wrong or objectively morally right to have sex with a corpse?
Yeah, this is one of those scenarios where I would say I think we would both say it's wrong, but in your subjective world, it might not be wrong for the person doing it.
For example,
you might think it's wrong, but they might not. But I think we would both look at that person doing that and go, doesn't matter what they think, that is wrong. And that's not just subjective.
I don't see how it's not subjective, because if everybody thought like he did, wouldn't it be just accepted as a norm that we see? Who would know to question it? Who would know to say it's wrong?
If the entire world were filled with corpse fuckers, the whole world is just fucking dead people all day, right? At that moment, it's your argument that it would not be wrong to fuck a corpse.
If I was one of those people, I mean, I don't see why I would complain about it being wrong.
No, I'm asking if it is wrong.
To me at this moment?
Yeah. In world B, we're in world A, but in world B, another dimension, everybody's corpse fuckers. Is it wrong in world B to fuck a corpse?
No, it's actually expected of you. He would be out of line to not do it.
Okay. In Muhammad's day, pedophilia was quite all right, societally speaking. Are you saying that there's certain scenarios that might make it okay to be a pedophile?
I'm not saying whether it's okay or not okay. What I'm saying is I don't prefer it. Therefore, I have a natural instinct to be repulsed by it. And that determines whether I see something as right or wrong.
Right. I'm with you there, but you have to
that's why I use the example.
If you push the moral relativistic angle, as far as we're courageous enough, most people aren't. That's what Camus said. A lot of people have to intellectually commit suicide because they just can't deal with it. But I think we have a lot of privilege. Atheists have a lot of privilege. Not that we're smarter, but we just somehow, our life, just the way that we're skeptical, we're able to process this information, and we're able to at least accept reality to that without the need of illusion. But if we're going to have the courage to both agree on nihilism, which we do, I think there's another step included, but it's a vague step at best. So we're basically on the same page there. But if we're going to have that courage, if we apply that same kind of courage to moral relativism, you have to end up saying some pretty crazy things that I don't think either of us think.
Why is it crazy? You have to ask the question.
To say that pedophilia might be right.
But
That's
let's
crazy.
focus.
The
Let's
fucking dead
focus
bodies
on.
might be a good thing.
Let's focus on why those things would seem crazy. We don't have to focus on the act itself. Let's focus on why would it seem crazy. The only reason that it would seem crazy is because me and you are the type of people who think that's crazy. That's subjective. If we were not the type of people who thought that way, nothing would seem crazy about it. We live in a society, we live in a universe where we all evolved and ended up at this point here. And there's some baggage that comes along with that journey. And me and you right now, we're stuck with that baggage. For example, if you lived in Muhammad's time, peace be upon him. If you lived in Muhammad's time, you would not think like you think now, Robert. You're completely determined. Yeah. So we only think it's crazy because of what baggage has came before us to make us think the way we think now.
Yes, but that doesn't mean that we can't be correct.
Who determines if we're correct or not? Other subjective beings.
Well, because these are perfect rules that we could follow. Like, who determines the laws of logic? Well, nobody's really determining it. We're just looking at reality and finding that there seems to be three really, really basic concepts of all reality that seem to apply to everything until these assholes with string theory came along. But fuck them. We're not talking about them. I would fuck their corpse. I don't know why I said that. But still, you can have subjective opinions about logic, but we know that there is an objective sense of logic, right? There are objective rules of logic in the universe.
No, there's not. If there is, we couldn't prove it. Like I said earlier, we could be in a simulation and all of that's built into the system. Outside of the simulation could be totally different. And there are plenty of philosophers out there who posit that we could possibly be in a simulation. You wouldn't know the difference if you was or wasn't. Logic could just be a computer program built into the system that we see it seems to be effective. If we woke up tomorrow and the whole rules changed, we would have to change our standards to fit what's most effective for what we're trying to accomplish.
That's level 31.
I'm gonna break your brain.
No, what we're talking about of whether there's laws of logic or not, that's based on the information that we have available. And then you were saying, well, that information could be wrong. And that's the oldest, well, I don't know, oldest. It's newer than, I guess, where we started with David and Psalms, right? But Rene Descartes said that it was like a demon. He said, there could be a demon that controls my mind and makes me see things a certain way. And at that point, that demon could make me believe I have hands, but I might not even have hands. I might just be some other kind of creature. I could be a cat and the demon made me think I'm a human, whatever. That obviously developed into the brain in the vat scenario or the Matrix or the simulation theory. It's all the same thing. Who cares? Yeah, that could be true, but that's not refuting anything that we know is true here. So like if I say 2 is an even number, the fact that, or the possibility that we're in the Matrix and on the other side of the Matrix 2 is odd and 3 is even, wouldn't change the fact that 2 is an even number based on the information we have. In the same way that we would argue there are laws of logic that exist even if there's no people to understand them. Even before we evolved to be able to see the laws of logic, or at least understand the concept of them, the laws of logic were still in place before there were any Homo sapiens.
Well, when I make my claim, let me put it in this way. You couldn't prove that yesterday happened. You could say, oh, I took these pictures yesterday. I placed this here yesterday. I could simply make the claim that, no, we put you here today. We planted all these memories. We set all this up for you to think that you were here yesterday, but you really wasn't. There's no real way to objectively prove that's not true.
There's no reason to believe that is true either.
I get that, but I can't remember who said it, but they said the only thing you could actually ever prove is that something is happening. That's all you could ever prove, that something seems to be happening. But you could wake up tomorrow, tied down to a bed, and find out you was in an insane asylum for the last 30 years, and everything that's been going on has just been in your head, and you only have your brain to determine whether or not.
I like that, because I always had trouble with Descartes' claim I think, therefore I am, which really was his way of saying, no matter what it is, even if it is a demon controlling me, at least I'm thinking. That much I know. But he's kind of like whenever you define a word with the word in the definition, or, what's a synonym or something, like, a synonym for synonym would be, and it's like, you're not defining the word, you're in this loop. And I always felt like that answer was like kind of in a loop, because he's inserting the word I as the person doing the thinking to argue that I am.
And he would be wrong, because the problem I have with that, I have a different problem with it than you do. And this is me. This is the stuff I really love to talk about, right? He could think and he could still be someone else. He could be another guy who inserted himself inside a matrix with false memories, and he could still be somebody else.
Well, he'd still be I, even if he's somebody else.
He would think he is what he considers to be him, but he could be that guy over there and not know it.
Oh, you're saying like we swap consciousness.
Or everything about him is a fabrication. It's all made up.
Sure, maybe. This is a rabbit trail, though, from the point of saying that this could all be a simulation or this could all be the Matrix does not refute the fact that the laws of logic existed before there was anyone to recognize them.
Well, I don't think so. For example, if God existed, you're not a creator unless you create something. Is God a creator without the creation?
No.
So what if the laws of logic are not the laws of logic unless there are people to
observe them,
rationalize, or to logical conclusions, for example? Because
we can test it. We can test and prove that the laws of logic existed before there was anyone understanding the laws of logic.
How
we
so?
know? Well, we can look back in carbon dating and recognize that there was still a planet here operating with the same rules, where either the dinosaur is or the dinosaur is not. But a dinosaur can't both be an is and an is not simultaneously. I think that's the first one.
But you run into the same dilemma that I presented earlier. What if everything was planted here to seem as if it was so, and everything just got started today?
That doesn't refute the argument that the laws of logic exist without any mind being aware of them. That's the same as the brain in the vat, same as the Matrix, same as Descartes' demon. Whether that's true or not, we just end up doing like what at the end of every high-powered business meeting, where everybody's like, oh, what if the package never arrived? Well, we'll never get paid. Well, if we didn't get paid, we're not gonna be able to pay the bank back for the loan that we got on the construction site, or what? And then some dude with a big cigar goes, we can only base it off of the information that we have. Let's all just calm down and carry on. And that's
my point. That's been my whole point. We're all acting. We're acting as if these things we know to be true. You can't prove mostly anything with 100% accuracy, but we must behave as if it is, because that's all we got to go by. And that's what humans do.
Just for clarity, the only reason I brought up the laws of logic was I was using that as an analogy. I thought we would both agree with that, to say objective morality exists whether there's humans here or not. It's still wrong objectively. It still goes against human flourishing, if we're at least going to accept that's what morality is, to pour acid on a baby. That's still bad, even if there's no acid and no babies, because those things would be still wrong. But you don't even agree with me that the laws of logic existed before Homo sapiens evolved. Apparently, it's the way I'm understanding it. So I think there are things that are effective in the reality that we live, and we therefore go based on those things because it works. It seems to be working. Therefore, we must act as if it is what it is. That's what knowledge is. It's justified true belief. There are statements that we can say that we know are true no matter what. Can we at least agree with that? You can't. Okay, there either is or there is not a bottle of water on my desk right now. That is a true statement.
I couldn't tell you if it was or wasn't. It may be, but there's always a possibility that it ain't.
But that was the statement. There either is or is not a bottle of water on my desk. And you can know that truth exists because all you have to do is make a claim and then make the opposite of that claim, something that negates that claim. And at least one of those answers is true. So if I say there is a bottle of water on my desk, and you say there is not a bottle of water on your desk, one of those answers is true.
Well, then you would first have to prove that we could prove that we're actually having this conversation. You would have to first be able to prove that we can prove because if this is all part of some simulation, then the words that me and you are speaking don't exist. So you can't make truth statements. You can't make objective true statements because objective statements don't exist. It's all in your mind. It's all built into the system. This whole experience can be built in the system. There could be no such thing as water. There could be no such thing as bottle. We just live in a system which tells us that it is. But how do you know how do you know I exist as a person? How do you know I'm not just a figment of your imagination?
There's no way to know that any of those things couldn't be happening, but there's no reason to believe those things. So you just go off of the information that you have. And with the information that we have, the laws of logic exist and objective morality exists.
No.
And there either is or is not a bottle of water on my desk.
And it's effective. It's effective in the environment in which we think which seems to be happening. And I'll go along with you and say there's either a bottle of water.
If you're going to say that we can't know it, then you're saying
we can't know that we know. We could know something. That's what that word means.
We don't have a language. We don't have a word for what you're describing. You know what I mean? The paradigm that we are in, we have the sufficient language to address it. But whatever you're talking about it's not even, you're not even making like a scientific or like a sci-fi scenario here. You're actually saying knowledge is like actual knowledge is impossible.
No, I'm saying it could be possible, but I wouldn't know it if I knew it. For example, everything we see could be real. I could never prove it with 100% certainty. So there's always a possibility that it could not be. So that's why I said that something seems to be happening. That's all you could ever prove with 100% accuracy. Something is happening. That's all we could ever say. Whether we're in a simulation, whether we are in a matrix, or whether we all are figments of your imagination and you're trapped somewhere, something's happening. We know that for sure. That's the only truth claim that we could even begin to 100% accurately make, is that something is happening. Everything else is up to interpretation. Everything up is subjective.
Let's do identity. You remember the old thing, Theseus's ship. You take out all the boards and replace all the nails one by one over many, many, many years. Is it still the ship of Theseus, even though not one board or one nail are the same as whenever we first called it the ship of Theseus, right? The typical response to that is, yes, it is the ship of Theseus because Theseus is the owner. So that's its identity, not necessarily the parts that make up the ship, but its identity is based on who owns the ship. Now, you might say, well, that ship is in a museum now. Theseus is dead. The person that owns it is some rich dude that contributed to the museum, and he just left it there. I don't even know who the owner is. But what's written on that plaque says the ship of Theseus. That's kind of what you're saying right now. You're saying you can't know it's the ship of Theseus. And I'm saying the way that we communicate with the words that we use in this reality, that's the ship of fucking Theseus. Because that's the only way we have to describe it.
We agree. What I'm saying is it works. If you want to call it the ship of Theseus, it works. It seems to work in a reality that we seem to inhabit.
It is the ship of Theseus.
We don't even know if there ever was a Theseus. We don't even know if he was just an imagination.
Yeah, I think that's just
but even if he was a man that actually existed and owned that ship, and it was the same ship and nothing was ever changed, we can never prove with 100% accuracy that Theseus exists objectively. He could just be another character in the Matrix that was invented for the sake of the story. But it works because we are trapped within our universe, which it seems to be the most effective way to go along to get along.
That's what truth is. Truth is limited to this thing. So whenever you're describing it and you're going, but is it really the really, really, really real? Well, I don't know what that is. But in this real, that is truth.
Based, and it's all subjective.
No, it's not. I think you and I agree on most everything. But the one thing that we have the most in common is that we're just disagreeable and we just like to argue shit.
Yeah. But this was good. This was good. I think that's a good place to wrap it up. I kind of took you a little further than I'm pretty sure you probably intended to go. I usually shock people.
I really thought we were just gonna stay with nihilism, but in a way, all those topics are kind of hanging fruit underneath that tree. So
yeah, I figured it would get into morality and truth of that sort. But overarching, it was about nihilism and how far you can take nihilism to its absurdity. Thank you, man. Plug your show, bro. Plug everything that you got going for yourself.
It's just real simple. TheRightToReason.com.
There it is. Go check out his podcast. I've been on it many times, and he has great guests on there, and I just think it's a cool show to check out. So appreciate you, Robert, from The Right to Reason, coming on, and I love doing this, and I'm pretty sure we're going to do it again in the future sometime. Peace, everybody. Stay safe and share this video, like it, and subscribe. Go to my Patreon and sign up at patreon.com, The Javier Show. Till next time, we out.
Thank you to Javier and Emerson. Thank you to Dave Blair at daveblairmusic.com. Thank you to feedspot.com for promoting The Right to Reason to the top 10 atheist podcasts. Thank you to our patrons. You can support this broadcast at patreon.com/right and learn more at therighttoreason.com. Next week, I don't know what's going to happen. I was lying to you. I was a little distracted by all this fucking bullshit with the election. I tried to play it tough, but you guys know it's been overwhelming, and that's a little representative of not only today's topic, but our current political scenario. I will talk to you again then, but between now and then, remember that you have the right to reason.